The Galactic Medical Journal called it impossible. She writhed on the treatment slab, breath trembling, violet eyes blown wide while monitors screamed in 3 languages, and one human stepped in as if he had shown up for a routine service call. Blue emergency lights washed the med bay in an aquarium glow. A circle of silver-robed clergy pressed together at the threshold, whispering over prayer beads that looked suspiciously like polished gaskets. Surgeons in lacquered masks traded sterile tools that failed to do anything but make the princess hiss and flinch. Her skin shimmered like marble warmed by sunlight, and beneath the collarbone a bioluminescent seam pulsed stubbornly shut, tight as a vacuum seal. The chief medic lifted a laser stylus, hesitated, and lowered it again. Sweat darkened his temples. The room smelled faintly of ozone and sterile citrus. A hush fell when the human cleared his throat. He did not look like a savior, which made the moment funnier and somehow more reassuring. His coveralls were clean but clearly lived in, the kind of fabric that remembered elbows on counters and midnight repairs in bad weather. A tool roll hung at his hip. He did not bow. He nodded like a bartender who had seen worse on a Friday. He took in the readouts, the princess, the unhelpful chorus on the threshold, and let out a thoughtful breath through his nose. Then he smiled, not cocky, just knowing. Turns out interstellar plumbing needs a human wrench. That was what he said, conversational as rain. The medics bristled. The clergy clutched their beads. The princess blinked through a veil of pain and tried not to notice that the human's voice seemed to slide past her defenses like warm water past stone. Her breath stuttered. The biolight under her skin flickered in time with a pulse that was a little too fast. The chief medic found his voice first. He recited a list of failed procedures in precise order, as if an incantation might shame the seal into opening. Thermal dilation. Quantum coaxing. A micro-lattice stent that jumped out like a cat touching a bathtub. The human listened without interrupting, eyes tracking across the instrumentation, then across the princess's posture. Every muscle from shoulder to hip had tightened around the sealed seam. He set his toolbox down with a soft thunk and rolled his sleeve. No blade, he said. No lasers. No prayer. When the hatch does not open, you call a locksmith, not an alien priest. A gasp went around the doorway. The clergy looked personally insulted by the existence of hinges. The human stepped to the bedside and introduced himself with a name that sounded like plain coffee and worn leather. He asked for consent with a seriousness that cracked through the fog of ceremony. The princess nodded, breath shallow. Her voice arrived late, steadier than she felt. Proceed. He spoke to her, not over her. He described the seal as a smart valve with a protective reflex, a body's version of a bouncer who panics and locks the club when the music hits a weird note. He asked about the day it closed. She swallowed. A shuttle descent, turbulent, pressure fluctuations, a jolt that made her teeth ring. The medics had flooded the tissue with coolant to prevent scarring. The valve learned the wrong lesson and stayed locked. He pulled an instrument that made the surgeons flinch and the priests murmur. It was not a weapon. It looked like a flexible probe with haptic pads along its length and a small reservoir assembly beside the handle. He primed it with something clear that caught the blue lights like melted glass. He grinned when the medics asked what, exactly, was in the reservoir. A gentle medium, he said. A coaxer. On worlds with storms, ships use it on bulky gaskets to teach them to relax. One of the junior surgeons took unsteady notes and underlined relax 3 times. He warmed his hands without fanfare, rubbing palm to palm as if about to knead dough. The princess watched the small, ordinary motion and felt something in her chest loosen a fraction. Ordinary mattered. The room had been full of rare metals and whispered invocations. Ordinary offered a path back to normal. He positioned himself where his face was the first thing she saw if she looked up. He told her how he would proceed. Slow. Gentle pressure. Feedback guided. If anything felt wrong, everything stopped. She nodded once, jaw set, arms by her sides with fingers curled into the sheet to keep them from reaching for him. He began with the lightest contact at the margins of the seam, a soft mapping of terrain. Sensors hummed. The biolight fluttered in skittish waves. The haptic pads in his fingers vibed a private language from the tissue, a code of tension, fear, reflex. He answered in patience. The clergy hated how clinical it looked. The medics envied how relaxed he was. He asked her to breathe in for 4 counts and out for 6. He matched her pace. The room breathed with them until the alarms softened to a tolerable background hum. That first minute felt like an hour. Pressure met resistance. Resistance sent back a warning. He eased, circled, returned, backed off again. He narrated for her the way a pilot narrates turbulence, so passengers remember that the sky has rules. The valve is smart, he said. It studies intent. We convince it that the world is safe. Her lips twitched. Safe was not the word she would have chosen for a room full of strangers arguing about her body like a philosophical puzzle. Yet when his fingertips adjusted and the probe sent a blooming warmth along the sealed edge, safe did not sound absurd. The chief medic could not help himself. He wanted to quantify. The human accommodated without breaking rhythm, calling out pressure in gentle increments, temperature in half-degree rises, all within a tight band that coaxed the tissue to soften rather than swell. He cracked small jokes that never landed on her, only on process. He compared the probe's feedback to a stubborn tap that whistles when you twist too hard. He compared the coolant purge to throwing ice water on a shy door. He took the heat out of the room with humor that never punched down. Her hand drifted toward his wrist and then stopped, hovering, as if proximity itself were a request. He shifted so his forearm rested where she could feel the weight. Nothing ornamental. Just a point of contact that translated presence into calm. The biolight changed again, less jagged, more like tides. He told her when to brace, and she did, and the reflex surge subsided faster each time. He marveled aloud, not at her body like a specimen, but at the astonishing intelligence of a system that would rather be safe than sorry. She whispered that most people called it broken. He said some doors are cautious. The clergy finally withdrew, whispering about sacrilege and locksmiths in the same sentence. The medics leaned in with curiosity that felt almost childlike. The junior surgeon asked if the technique had a name. The human smiled. Where I am from, the official term is a very technical phrase. He paused long enough to drag 3 eager faces closer. Gentle persistence. They stared. He shrugged. It works. Minutes braided together. The warm medium seeped into microchannels. The pressure map changed shape, a knot loosening under patient hands. Her jaw unclenched. She realized she had been waiting to feel embarrassed and instead felt oddly proud. She had endured a week of being an equation on a whiteboard. Now she was a person being coached through a difficult moment by someone who refused to make it mystical or obscene. He asked for one more cycle of breath. She gave him 2. A soft sound escaped from the seam, not a pop, not yet, more like a wet sigh behind a door. The human stopped immediately and let silence confirm the change. He withdrew a hair. He waited. The valve did not retaliate. He smiled, and this time she mirrored it without thinking. The senior surgeon let out a breath that hinged on a laugh and a sob. The human glanced up at the clock with a crooked grin. The Galactic Medical Journal called it impossible. He called it Tuesday night. The line should have sounded arrogant. It sounded like relief poured into a joke to make it easier to carry. He did not try to finish in one push. He set the probe aside, massaged the surrounding tissue through the skin with a motion that looked like smoothing rumpled pages. He told her they had reached the threshold and should let the body consolidate the progress before attempting the final release. He promised he would return after the system stabilized and the medium diffused evenly. She searched his face for hurry and found none. Her shoulders dropped. The seam glowed a softer blue, as if the valve itself were reconsidering its life choices. As the room reset around them, the human packed his kit with methodical calm. The medics whispered fiercely about protocols and documentation. The clergy had vanished, perhaps to draft a denunciation or a thank-you note, hard to say. The princess cleared her throat and asked his name again, savoring the shape of the syllables. He told her. She repeated it, testing the taste like a private incantation. He touched 2 fingers to the rail in a small promise. Back soon. She believed him, which surprised her more than the warming medium, more than the sighing valve, more than the way her pulse matched his count without trying. When he reached the doorway, a steward in ceremonial braid asked what resource to have on standby for his return. He did not hesitate. A quiet room, dimmer lights, warmth, and if someone insists on chanting, make it a lullaby. The steward blinked, then nodded. The human glanced back once. The princess lifted her hand in a small wave that meant thank you and also do not be late. He winked with one eye in a way that somehow felt professional and a little dangerous. The door slid closed. The room exhaled. Outside in the corridor, he leaned against a bulkhead and rolled his shoulders until the last of the tension cracked away. He allowed himself a short breath of pure amusement at the universe and its priorities. Planets burned power like teenagers burn through snacks, and here he was, saving a dynasty with patience, warmth, and a very persuasive probe. He headed for a sink to scrub his hands again, humming under his breath. Back in the med bay, the biolight along the princess's seam pulsed slow and steady, no longer a blade, now a heartbeat finding its calm. Her pulse steadied as the medium settled inside her body, but the hush in the room left more questions than answers. The first effort had softened the barrier, yet the real challenge remained. The human could feel the weight of every watchful eye as he prepared himself, and for all the chuckles he had tossed into the air earlier, the task now asked for both focus and a sly touch. He moved back to her side with hands steady and tone calm, as though coaxing a reluctant mechanism that only needed to be reminded how to function. He began describing what he would do next, his words simple enough to be understood but seasoned with humor sharp enough to make the medics wince. The princess clung to his voice as though it was the rope guiding her through fog. His fingers resumed their quiet map across the edges of the stubborn seal, applying careful pressure. Her chest rose in jagged rhythm, but each time he guided her through breath, the muscles eased a little further. He compared the process to loosening a jar lid that someone had twisted shut in spite. The jest brought a faint laugh from her, a sound small but genuine, and that laughter itself helped relax the stubborn tissue. The medics kept murmuring about ethical boundaries, yet their eyes were glued to every subtle shift of his hand. He leaned in, his tone teasing but deliberate, suggesting she let go of the instinct to clench. She tried, failing at first, but his grin and patient pace coaxed her toward surrender. Her moans startled her more than anyone else, and the clergy who had returned at the edge of the doorway shifted uneasily. He ignored them, keeping his focus on her. Humor became his tool as much as the probe, cracking crude lines about ships and tight ports, about seals that squeak before they sigh. She groaned at his shamelessness, but every groan carried more relief than protest. Minutes ticked forward like drops of water on steel. The warmth spread through her, each pass of his hand smoothing another layer of resistance. He explained to her that the body sometimes confuses defense for survival, sealing up not out of strength but fear. She understood, more than she wished to admit, how fear could lock one away. The medics leaned closer, shocked when she whispered that she trusted him. Her words silenced the room more effectively than any order. He tested the seam again with a firmer push, and this time the tissue yielded slightly before resisting. He smiled, telling her not to panic, that small victories built to large ones. She whispered a trembled joke about charging him rent if he kept working the same spot, and he chuckled, meeting her humor with a sly remark about long leases. Her blush spread along her cheeks, the glow beneath her skin reflecting the heat in her face. The entire chamber seemed warmer for it. Every adjustment grew bolder, though still measured. He teased the barrier, withdrawing just when it began to close, returning once it relaxed again. The rhythm became almost intimate, a dance where she followed his lead and learned when to let herself trust the motion. She gritted her teeth once, and he stopped immediately, praising her for signaling. That pause, that respect, made her let go even more, the tension falling from her shoulders. She reached out unconsciously, her fingers brushing his wrist, and he let her hand rest there without breaking pace. The counselors at the back whispered fiercely about impropriety, but none dared interrupt. Each adjustment stretched time itself. The princess found her breaths sinking to his count, longer, smoother, as though her body had finally decided to stop fighting. The medium worked deeper, the haptic pads sang a softer note, and the barrier no longer felt impenetrable. He joked lightly that it was like convincing a stubborn door to open by singing it lullabies instead of kicking it down. That comparison drew laughter even from a surgeon who had sworn not to smile. The seam pulsed in softer light, and she whispered that something inside her felt ready. He cautioned her not to rush, his voice steady, reminding her that readiness is fragile when forced. She swallowed, nodding, trusting the pace. His fingertips guided the final curve, his voice guiding her breath, and though the barrier held, it no longer felt like a wall. It felt like a door that had begun to recognize its key. The medics scribbled furiously in their notes, though none of them could capture the real essence of what unfolded. This was not technique alone, not mere pressure and warmth. It was patience dressed in humor, respect hidden in crude jokes, and a strange intimacy forged by necessity. She gazed up at him, exhausted but no longer afraid. He wiped a bead of sweat from his brow with his sleeve, and smirked that tomorrow would hurt less if she kept breathing like that. She laughed, shaking her head, amazed that he could turn agony into comedy. What had begun as a procedure was becoming something more, something that shifted the air in the room. She no longer looked like a patient pinned by circumstance, but like a woman who had found someone bold enough to meet her barriers without fear. He packed the probe aside again, promising he would return for the final push once her body adjusted further. She nodded, the glow in her chest now a gentle thrum instead of a frantic alarm. As he stepped back, the room seemed lighter, charged not just with anticipation but with a new kind of curiosity. The medics whispered about unprecedented techniques, the clergy muttered about sacrilege, but she watched only him. The seal had not broken yet, but something inside her already had. He offered a crooked smile and told her this was only the warm-up. Her lips parted, caught between a laugh and something deeper. And as he walked toward the door, the silence hummed with expectation, the entire chamber bracing for the moment when the final barrier would give way. The transition had begun, and the path ahead promised not only resolution but revelation. The chamber carried a silence that seemed to wait for something larger than words. Her body had softened, her breath matched his rhythm, and the barrier that once seemed like an unmovable wall now trembled at the edge of release. The human's hands rested at his sides for a moment, his gaze steady, measuring how far she had come and how close they were to the breaking point. She met his eyes, silently telling him she was ready, though her pulse betrayed the storm rushing beneath the calm. He let the moment linger, letting her anticipation settle, and then returned to his work with precision that carried both patience and daring. The touch began again, warmer this time, steadier, guided by experience rather than trial. He pressed with deliberate intent, no longer just coaxing but demanding the barrier recognize his persistence. She gasped, not from pain but from the sudden awareness that the seam was yielding. Her body's reflex clenched once, then loosened as he murmured something half-joking about stubborn locks that squeak before they give. The comparison startled a laugh out of her, breaking the tension, and that laughter loosened the final threads of resistance. The glow under her skin brightened, pulsing wildly, as though her body was warning that the long-held seal was about to surrender. The medics leaned in, their instruments humming in disbelief. The counselors at the back whispered frantic debates, one insisting this was desecration while another muttered that they were witnessing history. He ignored them all, his focus locked on the princess's breathing. Her nails dug lightly into his wrist, not to stop him, but to anchor herself in the moment. He kept his pace measured, easing forward, then holding, then pressing again, until the resistance finally cracked. The sound was not sharp but wet and sighing, a long exhale from a door that had been closed too long. Her entire body jolted, as if a wave had coursed through her, and then her shoulders collapsed back with relief so pure it brought tears to her eyes. Gasps filled the chamber, a chorus of disbelief that rang louder than the machines. He exhaled slowly, shaking his head with a grin that carried both exhaustion and triumph. She laughed between shallow breaths, whispering that she had not believed it possible, and he answered with a crude remark about first times always being messy. Even she managed to laugh at that, though her face flushed with heat that glowed visibly beneath her translucent skin. The medics scrambled to record every detail, muttering about unprecedented elasticity and adaptive tissue memory. He waved them off with a smirk, saying all the research papers in the galaxy could not capture the simple truth that sometimes things just needed a human touch. The princess reached for his hand again, holding it tighter now, as though acknowledging that he had done what no one else could. She whispered that no healer, no priest, no surgeon had ever made her feel both safe and undone in the same breath. His crooked smile answered with the kind of humor that deflected gravity, promising he was just doing his job, though his eyes lingered on hers a moment longer than professionalism demanded. That pause carried the unspoken truth that something between them had shifted beyond the medical. The chamber no longer felt clinical but charged with a new intimacy. The council began arguing openly now, voices rising in indignation and awe. One demanded he be censured, another called for him to be honored, and a third wondered if humans should be trained as specialists. He raised his eyebrows, muttering that he would rather get hazard pay than medals. The princess laughed, gripping his hand tighter, her relief deepening into something warmer, more curious, as if her ordeal had unlocked more than a seal. Her gaze softened, and in that look, the medics saw a truth they would never write in their journals. She had not just been healed, she had been changed, and it was not science that had done it but trust. The human leaned closer, teasing that the hard part was over, though the cleanup was always worse. She laughed again, shaking her head, whispering that he was insufferable even when saving her life. He replied that someone had to keep her from taking herself too seriously. Their banter carried an intimacy the others could not follow, and the medics stood awkwardly to the side, caught between reverence and discomfort. Yet none could deny the results staring them in the face. The seal pulsed one last time, stabilizing into a steady glow that no longer screamed of distress. The machines confirmed what her body already told her. She was free. Her shoulders slumped, her breath returned to a normal rhythm, and she closed her eyes for a moment, savoring the stillness. He pulled back slightly, packing away his tools, but her hand tugged at his, unwilling to let go just yet. He glanced down, eyebrows raised, and she whispered that after all he had done, he could not simply walk away. His smirk softened into something almost tender. For the first time, the medics fell quiet, their curiosity drowned out by the recognition that something deeper than medicine had unfolded. The clergy did not return, perhaps unwilling to admit they had been wrong, but the silence they left behind was filled by the quiet connection at the bedside. He promised her that she would not face relapse, that the body would remember the lesson, and she smiled at the word lesson as though he had been her teacher all along. He quipped that he was used to teaching stubborn cases, and she laughed even as a tear slid from the corner of her eye. The chamber no longer buzzed with panic. Instead, it held the heavy warmth of completion. She whispered thank you in a tone that carried more weight than titles or honors. He shrugged, answering with humor to keep the gravity light, but his eyes betrayed that the words had struck him deeper than he let on. He straightened, rolling his shoulders, but did not release her hand. He told her the ordeal was over, but the story was just beginning, a promise that lingered in the air like a challenge. As he finally stepped back, the medics whispered again about publishing findings, about rewriting medical doctrine, about studying the human method. He brushed past them with a grin, telling them they would only embarrass themselves trying to write footnotes about patience and joke. The princess lifted her head and told them all that no amount of analysis could capture what had happened. They nodded, though none truly understood. She lay back, glowing with relief, her eyes fixed on him as he turned toward the door. The chamber faded into background noise as her voice followed him, soft but insistent, asking if he would return. He looked over his shoulder, smiled with that same crooked grin, and answered that once a lock has been opened, sometimes the key has to stick around. Laughter rippled even through the medics, and for the first time, tension gave way to warmth. The ordeal had ended, but what came after promised to be stranger, funnier, and far more dangerous than anyone in that room could imagine. And with that, the transition into what lay beyond the healed seal had begun.